request Laura Turway, planning director, or that's community development director.
Either way.
Yeah, but anyway, most people don't know what community development means, but they have a better idea of what planning is. And I did ask her to actually come to speak to us because wetland issues and inventory has been an issue, and she agreed to do so. Laura, I really appreciate that a lot. I actually invited, through Laura, I invited Martin Montalvo to be here, and maybe he might take some time to look at some of the streamside activities that the Public Works is going to be looking at, if you don't mind. I didn't kind of alert you ahead of time what it would be, but you know, it could be a general presentation if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm prepared to talk to it to some extent.
Very good, thank you. With that, we'll go to the item 5A, project status update, amendments to the Natural Resource Overlay District map in Kenema. Recall this is an item that we brought up 2 years ago to the City Commission. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just the background on this is there was a wetland that was found in Kenema. It was outside of our natural resources. Yeah, this actually is for the next one, so you could ignore the presentation for now. Because my status update is quick, and we have had a goal to put this wetland that we found, it was delineated by DSL, into our natural resource overlay district for a while. I think it either came up this summer or last summer. I can't quite remember, but it was sometime during the summer. And it's been on our list, and we haven't done it yet. It is still on our list. We put out a weekly agenda of items for planning division, and it's on our to-do list every week, and it always has been. And we've committed to the City Commission that we would do it by the end of the budget cycle, or within the biennium, which is was their direction after it was brought up from you guys as well. And so it is a priority. Once we level out with applications and court and staffing, we will do it. But unfortunately, we have to dedicate our resources to things where we have legal deadlines or court issues. And unfortunately, that's been taking up a lot of time.
Is your microphone on? Mine wasn't. And
mine is on. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. So the update is a sad one because the update is that we haven't done anything. But it is on our list and it is important to us. And I hope that it doesn't come across that it's not important because we haven't done anything. It's just limited resources, which I know is the worst thing that I could say, but it is there. We are paying attention to it. We haven't really dug into it very much, but we intend to.
One of the things that I think we mentioned, and actually the Planning Commission also, year before last, making their report, actually had expressed the same kind of concerns. I wanted to indicate that. One thing, not limiting it just to Kenema, we have other areas that the city will be expanding to under our various master plans, and whether at some point the state might delineate streams that weren't on our maps from new areas as they're coming in. And whether there might be the possibility when you're looking at this issue to be able to, when these things come up, have some kind of a holding designation until the area can be evaluated.
We have all of our concept plan areas have the resources, or the NROD map goes out through the UGB, so it is in the concept plan areas. I appreciate that you brought that up because we have been talking about that recently, actually. It's that time where we start to think about grants for next year or the year after. And so on our list of grants, if we could find one that matches, is to redo the inventory, which is a request that came from NRC. And so we've been trying to wait for grants to see if there's one where we're going to apply for a few different grants, but one of them, if we can find a pairing, would be to redo our inventory. So go site to site, use whatever data we can to try and map all our resources. So it would be streams and wetlands. So redo that comprehensive inventory that we've done before, because it's been a while.
Does you have a rough idea of the estimate of the cost?
We think it's $300,000. It's a lot, and it depends too if someone's walking on everyone's property. Like the one we did before, they literally went around the whole city.
When you have the opportunity to do so, I'm sure you'll ask the Natural Resource Committee for a letter of support, and we'd be happy to provide it. And I know the Oregon City Watershed Council would be, Oregon City Watershed, yeah, that's council, would be happy to do so too.
Yes, and also if you want to help us, keep an eye out for any grants that you think could help fund that. We're actively looking, and there's a couple things we want to get grants for. We're applying for a grant for a new comprehensive plan, and then this. So those are the two biggies. And then we're thinking about smaller projects. But again, they'll happen if you get it within the cycle. Nothing even happens till 2019.
John Runyon and Associates is a contract with I think through John Lewis, and he calls me once every couple of weeks and tells me about other grants he saw. And he's always looking for resources, for the work that he does. He's a natural resources consultant. And I wonder, he's already on contract with you guys, the city, excuse me. You need to give him a call and have him look for you. That's my suggestion.
That's a good idea.
Because he's a professional person that looks for that stuff all the time.
The more of us that are looking for money, the better.
Yep.
At the moment, we got a lot of grants that we're working on too, which is part of the reason why we're distracted. So we hope to be well timed, better timed next time.
Yeah, he also coordinates the coalition of the Clackamas River Partners and Watershed Councils, which includes ourselves, Johnson Creek and Kellogg Creek, I should say North Clackamas Watershed and Clackamas River Basin Watershed Council in terms of projects and seeking grants for those. We've got our project list up there, and it doesn't actually include anything like that, but we might be able to take a look at that.
Yeah.
A lot of them come from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, where we seek our funds. One of the things you might explore whether, in fact, municipalities can put forward grant requests to OWEB.
Okay.
Those are funded by lottery dollars.
Wonderful. Yeah, we look for grants from many places, but the primary source of most of our grants is Metro.
Mm-hmm.
So this is good. The more resources, the better.
Okay.
And then you do have one public comment on this as well.
Yes, we do. Paul.
Thank you all. Part of my wanting to talk a little bit about this, if I could just maybe come around here, is that a lot of times...
Can I have you speak?
Yeah.
I could hold it for you, or we can move it back, but just so we can get you in the microphone.
Okay.
And you are a resident of Oregon City, Paul.
I'm Paul Edgar, resident of Oregon City and Kanema. Interestingly, Kanema, platted in 1865, was flat platted. No one really cared about one thing about whether there's hills or dales or creeks or anything like this. And so we live with something that's got water resources percolating right out of the bluff everywhere. But one of these natural areas where the wetlands is actually a direct result of one of the oldest platted or known water resources in Kanema. It was the Kanema Historic Waterworks. And there was pipes that were to come out of there to feed all of Kanema with its potable water. And lo and behold, Kanema annexed and became a part of Oregon City. And in doing so, we got Clackamas River water, and no longer the need for that waterworks, but the water flows out of there, and that is not on the map, by the way. And it flows like it's a creek, and it flows down over the hill, it comes down. And if any of you have not seen it or gone up there and taken a look at the series of tanks and stuff like this that are there, you should. But then it flows down because the tanks are breaking apart, and it flows down the hill. And so this whole hillside coming down from there is just a flush with water. It's like digging holes in the sand. And you just go down a few inches and it fills up with water. So then it flows down and becomes this water plat, or the area where the water. That is all written up in the historic Kenema nomination document to give it a National Register historic status. So we've all known about it. It's in the documents, but it was never mapped. And that's the critical element, not part of the record. So it's not part of the NROD overlay, and it just becomes not known. So the water then flows out of there and flows down what was a creek all the way down, and then flows down to 4th Avenue. And down, basically, let me see where it would be. I think it's Apperson.
You gotta hold that up now.
I think it's Apperson where it comes out. So it's coming down, it comes out of here, and then it comes down.
I'm gonna stop you a minute, just see if we can work out something here, so you can get the mic in front of you
Okay,
better.
so it flows down between 4th and what would be 4th and 5th. And 5th Avenue is through there is an unimproved right-of-way. And then it goes down through that area, and then it circles right down to 4th Avenue, and then comes out in Pike. Years ago, I don't know who did it, but they, without permits, illegally buried the creek through there. And it comes down through there. The city picks it up at 4th Avenue and puts it into a pipe there and carries it down to what would become a little kind of, I guess they call it Little Coffee Creek, that runs down by Blanchard. It comes right down through Blanchard, right through a bunch of the houses there. And the key to all of this is that here we have a creek. When the pipe that they put in when they buried it is too small. And so when we have an extreme water event, the water builds up, because when they buried it, they kind of made it a dam. And the water weight is not big enough, so then it backs up, flooded basements around through there, and it's also gone all the way down, floods over Miller Street, and then floods down and goes down through the yards, and then down over through down 4th, and then down through to 3rd. And it creates quite a hell of a mess. But it is a real world of what we have in Kenema, which is just water. Right across the street from my house, I have a pond. And it used to be 15 feet deep, but with sediment and stuff like that, it flows out, comes out of there, goes out of a pipe, down, across 5th Avenue, right through between my house and my garage. It comes out, and it flows like crazy through there. And it's funny, I've tested the water coming out through one of the aquifers. It's pure. It doesn't have anything in it. It tested out as good a quality as you could ever get. And so this is stuff coming from where, I don't know, but it's coming down through this area. And my suggestion to you all, if you've never done it, should let us come down, take a look at the unique geology that we have. Because part of this geology is that when you have water and steep slopes and LIDAR mapping that says that most of Kenema has both steep or deep and shallow landslides, and it has the highest susceptibility to landslides. This stuff is coming out everywhere, and you just really, the map is one thing, the area is small, but if you have never walked it, you've never seen it, please let us do it sometime for you, because it's worth it, because it needs a lot of help, it needs a lot of people to think about it. There's no simple solutions. If everybody had it all figured out, it wouldn't be a problem.
Thank you. Martin, when he's talking about illegal undersized pipes, I presume they're going through private property.
Yes, they are. And they go through alleyways, though. That's public.
is there anything that the city can do to, I know you've got a lot of things on your plate all over the city in terms of stormwater issues and so forth. Is there anything the city can do under those circumstances?
I'd have to take a look at it. I can't tell you anything off the top of my head.
Yeah,
So,
But
the problem with Kenema have been there for years, as Paul points out.
yes,
And the difficulties down there are expensive. So
No.
I don't have a solution on top of my head.
okay.
all I know is that that one pipe is so small that it creates flooding.
Is that the pipe that comes down by where they were doing that improvement that looks like it goes in the backside of 3 houses?
Now, it comes down, it comes out on Fourth Avenue and Apperson. There's a house that sits up on the bluff and it's got plywood across all the windows. It's a white house that's been sitting there for a long time. It comes right behind that house and then right into the Apperson Street easement where it perks out and there's a rock wall right there and there's a pipe coming out and it flows. But it flows year round, so this is not one that, this is a perennial stream that's been buried and piped, and they just did it poorly. And when, I don't know. All I know is it's been done for quite a while, and it just creates a problem in a lot of respects, and it's part of this wetland, the outflow of the wetland, and part of the outflow of historic Kenema Waterworks. I have one other map that I would like to show you guys that I brought with me.
It's okay with the whole board that
Thank
he's
you.
going over his 3-minute lecture.
Yeah.
And this is one, this is to kind of give you a picture, because
I'll watch your microphone again.
okay,
I want to see anything.
this is Dogami map. And all of these red areas here are all of these landslides. And when we come down here, these landslides, I can track right down through to my house, right in here and here where I can see South End Road in the map, where it turns down to Fifth Avenue, which goes right by my house, and is square in the middle of a Dogami LiDAR identified landslides.
The park, the Kenema Bluff Park, the new one,
Yeah.
what is it on John Adams Street? Yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, it's active, rockfall at one edge of that park.
So as we go around here, the other day I passed on a CD of all of the geologic conditions that I got from Dogami. It showed all of the tailings and all of the more in-depth view of the impacts of all of this
You pass that on to who?
to the city, so that the city, with the hope that the city could put it up on their website.
Okay.
So that when we get into discussions and people are saying, what are the natural resources, situations, or conditions that exist?
All right.
They could actually go to the website and take a look at this, because not everyone goes to the extent that I do to try to understand the geology and the water resources. This just happens to be, you know, I've been in the past the land use chair of the neighborhood, so this was one of the things that was part of my task.
Actually, I can, kind of independently verify what you say because I walked all over
So
that
did I.
neighborhood when I thought about buying in
Yep.
there, and
right.
I've told stories before, but I've also went and found the old water plant like you talked about,
Right.
and
Yeah.
there's a lot of water and a lot of rocks
Yep.
moving in
Yep.
there.
Lot
and-
of
See
stuff.
the erosion, even when the.
Well, the lot that, or
Where it's
the,
been.
the property that I bought, and for some reason it's stayed vacant for over 3 years now, I have no idea why, 8 lots, I couldn't find a place to build a garage on 8 lots. There wasn't a spot big enough, which I guess is why there was a
Where it's sitting.
2-story, 700 square foot house and no garage.
But even in front of our house, our house has been in the family 130 years in one family. And when Grandma lived in our house, the front of it slid down, and there's an exposed big rock right in front. Our house looks, you
Yeah,
see the
you've
back of the
talked
house,
about that,
but we
right.
look down towards 4th Avenue. And so it exposed a big rock. We don't know how big it is, maybe 2 or 3 tons. But if it breaks loose, it will go to the Willamette River, and it'll go through anything and everything. And I've tried very hard to make sure everyone understands how careful we have to be when we're doing any type of stuff on slopes like that, because people will die in that case. And so, anyway, this is just an example of that, and we hope in the future that I could, anytime anybody wants to, we'll do a show and tell, and Martin or anybody can come along. It's just the best thing we can do to protect Oregon City and save lives is to make sure that we have greater awareness.
Paul, don't you think, he was asking earlier about maybe a walking tour for us. Last spring I did 3 or 4 of these things with Dorothy helped me and others. This, to me, is a very significant area to look at because the interface is not, it's like Waterboard, but Waterboard is not populated with people necessarily. In some areas it
And I
is.
still see
This is a
people-
populated area. It'd be interesting to see the geology at work in there. If you got these Dogami maps, I'd be willing to work with you on planning a
There's a
walking
lot-
tour.
There's a lot more going on there than at Waterboard because of the water.
I know, you're right. I agree with
The
you.
rocks are falling
Right.
and there's a lot of water. I mean, a bunch.
And people. And that's.
Yeah, there's a lot of houses crammed in there. You'd be
It looks to me
surprised.
like people are still filling creeks in their backyard. I was up in that area and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, looks to me like they put landfill back there.
There's
It's
some,
not
there's some
gonna
things
stay.
there are some
And
things
I-
that are happening that we have to live in the neighborhood, so,
Yeah, I was kind of
we
looking at
have to
it
be
going,
we have to be
roll.
somewhat careful, and there are property rights,
Yeah.
and as long as somebody doesn't do something atrociously stupid, is in our best interest to keep our mouth shut.
Well, I'll pose a question. If somebody sees something, does it come to code enforcement first?
Yeah, so we would encourage if there's anything that raises any concern to submit an OC request. It's electronic. We have an app for it even, but just let us know and we'll identify it in the correct spot depending on what it is.
And then does the complainee is a record of that complainee that is the public can
Yeah, you can
access
do it
it?
anonymously. You can do it not
So
anonymously.
you can do it anonymously?
Yeah.
Never been able to do an anonymous one.
Well, then you can just call code enforcement directly and not give them your name. You can do it that way too.
Well, we're trying, and those of us that are really care, that are very environmentally conscious, this is a big issue, and all of this landslides and just protecting Kenema is important, and I don't want to see people die or to have something. I don't want to see the water fouled. I don't want to see basements flooded, and that's been happening. And I would like to see, importantly, around the wetlands, we have an environmental setback rule. I would like it to see it be actually enforced. It's in our code, it's in all of the wetland code, and protections from water resources. Even Coffee Creek right next to me, coming down over the hill, I'm looking at the platting of it, and there's a setback from the creek right there in code, or in the bill, in the deeds, that say you know, that's say 25 feet from the creek water level. And so I have Coffee Creek going through the lower 40 of my property. And I don't want to be down there. It's pretty, but the only thing that's good for it right now is the deer.
Never say that to a fish guy.
I guess the question I have is, you've gone through, I'm gonna have you introduce yourself actually, because I do have a question.
Patty Webb.
No, I'll need you to do it officially
I'll step around
and
here.
just indicate that you're an Oregon City resident, because based on something you said, I want to ask you something, so.
I'm Patty Webb. I live in Kenema, Oregon City, 310 3rd Avenue.
You don't have to give the address, yeah. You mentioned that you have filled in the apps and it forces you to put in your name, is that correct?
I've done complaints both through the app and over the phone.
To
And-
code enforcement?
Yeah.
And what has been the response?
As far as being anonymous?
Are they demanding your name in terms of the
Oh,
complaint?
yeah. And then, sorry, but normally they ask for very extensive explanations on why I think something's illegal and why I think they should do something about it. Very extensive. So much that you pretty much have to have a pretty good knowledge of the law and how to explain it to get any kind of response. Tree cutting, different things that I've called in about, especially tree cutting. They've questioned me on why I think that's illegal. And I say, well, because it takes a permit to cut down any tree in Kenema. It's in our historic code. And they usually say, well, we don't know anything about that. And I mean, it's been a couple of years since we had the tree issue, and there have been other issues that I've have a real neighbor dispute going on with. And he would probably know it was me anyway, but I've never been able to do anything anonymously.
It's disheartening to hear your experience. We certainly have seen OC requests and complaints come in without the name on the back end of it. But, I mean, send an email to a planner. I mean, we want to try and understand what the issue is, but
It's causing
should-
a lot of disputes in the neighborhood. It's a system that really pits neighbor against neighbor. And, you know, when you have a problem and your neighbor's doing something illegal, it's a tough situation to be in because you know it's going to inflame it if you call in. And if they come out and write them up and then they don't do anything, then it really inflames it. So it's a touchy situation.
yeah, I just wanted to communicate that we do have a lot of code enforcement violations where they are anonymous, and if it's not working to call or whatever it is, then you can always call me, and I will do something about it. Or you can call the planning department if code enforcement isn't working, or send us an email. I mean, we have a responsibility and an honor to enforce our code, and, yeah. I mean, we may, if there's a phone number, we may want to ask questions or something like that, but nobody's obligated to give any minimum
Other than yourself,
information.
is another point person? That is, I know,
Anyone in
I
the
know Pete.
planning division.
yeah,
I mean, anybody is
Okay.
fine.
Just recently on a complaint that I'd made about 5 months ago, I got a real threatening letter from a neighbor that said code enforcement had been up there and were up there because of a complaint that I had made. That specifically they didn't want to be doing that, but they were forced to because of an investigation that I had started personally. And that's in the letter that she wrote to me.
so it shows your name.
It shows my name and blames her situation on me, which what they were looking at, I had no knowledge of and had made no complaint about.
Did you say that the code enforcement, or this person stated that code enforcement said, well, they wouldn't do anything about it if it wasn't for her complaint?
They said that the reason that they were there was because of an investigation that I had started, and they wouldn't have to be there unless I had made a complaint. And they gave her my name. And that's coming from her, so you'd have to check with her for sure, because she's the one saying it. I wasn't there, I was up there taking pictures, because when I made a complaint to code enforcement, they said that I would have to show them video before they would take a complaint. And so I went and stood in the middle of the street and videoed the work being done. And then that's part of her complaint, is I'm somehow stalking her.
I can take a look at, I mean, I don't know that this venue is right
Right.
for kind of the direction.
Right,
but-
well,
I mean,
code enforcement is strictly a complaint. It is not really a proactive department. It is complaint driven. I think your concern is that you get a backlash from your neighbor
Yeah.
if that happens.
I personally feel I'm pretty much set up for that.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, we've gotten way off topic.
that's okay. I
But it
mean,
does affect the complaint process, and if
Step up to the
you
mic.
see something in the neighborhood, you probably should know that it is a very difficult thing to complain.
Oh, sure.
And it causes a real feud in the neighborhood, and when someone's breaking the law or causing damage, it shouldn't have to adversely affect the neighbor that way to do something about it.
I know where you're coming from. I had a very vindictive neighbor, very vindictive. And so, yeah, I can understand where that would come from. You need to have some emanated.
Yeah, and unless you want to fire back with all their silly complaints and do it back, then you really don't have a leg to stand on, and I don't want to do that.
In this one case, again, excuse me,
Can we, I have a really long presentation for the next.
we're gonna,
5 days of major truckloads of rock out of there, and no one said anything for a while.
yeah, we'll go ahead and explore that.
Mr. Chairman, whether we could just lend our concern about the whole thing.
Well, yeah.
Send a simple memo to code
I
compliance.
wonder if
I don't know.
if code enforcement is forced to take down and made available the names of anybody that makes a complaint.
You know what would be a good agenda item is if you want them to come here and talk about their process. That might be a really good thing. It might be a really good guest just to go through, to go through and
Yeah,
so
I would say that.
they can answer all,
yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt at
Let me
all.
write that down as
Yeah.
in the future.
And we want to go on. Let me just make one comment. As you start looking at the wetland inventory, one of the reasons I brought
love
Martin
to look at it.
here, asked Martin to be here, is because they're involved in some working with property owners in terms of shade trees. And I don't know if when you're looking at your wetland inventory, whether you will be looking at mitigation processes that are built into the inventory, and whether the kinds of density of plants that the Public Works would be looking at is relevant to what you do on the wetland inventory in terms of mitigation plannings. And so that's a question I had.
Yeah, when we get closer to firming up a grant request in a project, this is a
Okay.
good conversation I'd love to have.
Are you going to bring Martin into the discussion as you're going through your presentation then, or how do you want to do that?
I guess so.
Martin?
Or whatever.
I'll pay attention. How about that? So just so you know, our mitigation, I have to be very careful when we do any mitigation that addresses TMDLs that are associated with some other secondary project. The way TMDLs and mitigations are typically written is that you're supposed to be mitigating for said impact. You can't use it to double dip for some sort of other project. Also, you're not supposed to tie it or mingle it in with other grant-funded projects. It's supposed to be something you're supposed to fund independently. They look at it as, again, double dipping. I'm not exactly sure what Laura's upcoming project is with the proposed project in the future for remapping the wetland inventory. I was prepared to talk to you about what we're currently doing and what we've been talking to the Watershed Council about getting your assistance in the near term. Laura's project seems like it's much further off.
The question I wasn't concerned was, I can understand your issue about double dipping. My question is, if you have planning densities you're looking at in this effort, whether they should take a look at that in terms of any mitigation they have. I'm not suggesting that the two departments specifically could become involved in any of their respective issues, but whether there is some kind of feedback that planning can have in terms of the kind of densities you're going to be looking at when you're doing your work. And that
We can
was what I
coordinate
wanted
with
to pose.
And when you guys get in, if that project gets some legs and starts running, we've got staff that can help with that when it starts getting going.
Yeah, and I mean, I heard about this, and I thought, well, maybe there'd be some benefit then to have that occur. Martin, I don't want to keep you here very long.
It's all right. I'm paid to be here, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm in the doghouse already with the wife, so don't worry about me missing Valentine's Day.
Well, I'd like to just go ahead and apologize for being tardy, but I didn't stay with the same lady for 44 years by forgetting Valentine's Day. I just thought I'd throw that in, and
Okay.
service was a little slow tonight. I'll leave it at that.
Just tell them that you forgot it was Valentine's Day, but knew it was the birthday of Oregon City and the state of Oregon, and make that your excuse.
And let your wife know that Laura generously gave you some candies to give to your wife.
Oh, there you
She did
go.
not.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, wait a minute. There's candies that went around? What's this? I'll remember this.
Clearly it didn't go all the way around.
I'll remember.
Well, Laura, I'm going to let you make the decision.
Laura, you don't need to move your agenda around for me.
You can, if you want to talk for a little bit, then you can scoot, and then I can go into stuff.
You don't need to move
can
your
stay
agenda
either
around
way.
for me. Go ahead.
Martin, would you please go ahead and make your presentation?
So as I said earlier, I hadn't necessarily prepared a presentation. You'd asked me to come and talk about what I presented to the Watershed Council.
Right, and I'm not expecting a formal presentation, but the fact that you're doing this, I think, would be of
So
interest.
I'll give you guys a little heads up on what we've done in the past, or what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we've done in the past, and what we're proposing to do in the future. So the city has a TMDL imposed on it by the state and the federal government.
Define that acronym
So
for us.
a TMDL is a total maximum daily load. So TMDLs are a result of Clean Water Act legislation that basically says that if a community has a defined pollutant, that the state and federal government can impose on you a limit of what the total maximum daily load of said pollutant is allowed to be within your jurisdiction. So one of the TMDLs that's defined for Oregon City is temperature. So let's say that some of our creek systems, some of our stream systems running through the city are, the temperature's too high. So we have to try and figure out a mechanism for how do you address that. So obviously I can't, just refrigerate the creeks. So we look at trying to create shading opportunities where the historic creek systems, the vegetation's been denuded or minimized, and try and create some shade corridors. So in the past, we've had some good success with a few locations within the city. We have a report that was prepared several years ago in response to the TMDL that identified opportunities for creating shade within our jurisdiction. So the things I have to deal with is A, is it within the confines of Oregon City? So our incorporated limits, and B, is it within property that we can control one way or another? So is it city-owned or county-owned or a partner that I can easily work with that will allow us to go out and plant? So I can tell you that we've targeted those areas and we've run it to exhaustion. There are still a few areas that we could plant, but we basically have done replantings on several of these locations. So now we're starting to take a look at areas outside of our control, both jurisdiction and property ownership, and see what we can do to try and do some plantings in those areas. So our department participates with the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council, and we've tried to partner with them. They've got a much better outreach mechanism for some of the private property owners outside of Oregon City that we're going to try and work with them to help us with the outreach component. So they've got relationships that we want to use. They've got partners they've worked with before that we want to use that are on some of these identified creek systems, because if we can get credit for doing work that's not just within Oregon City, but for systems that feed into Oregon City. So right now we're working with the Watershed Council for trying to develop a scope of services for them to help us with the outreach component, and then also help us with the subsequent planting for those areas, both for short-term and some long-term maintenance associated with that. We have an annual allocation within our stormwater budget to help with this program. It's something that we've had since I've been here. There's been money in that to help with plantings every year, and our intent is to use those funds. It's not a new program. I'm not asking for additional funds from commission or for leadership. It's something that's already allocated, and we're starting to move forward beyond our district. So that's it. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Try to, at least.
Besides TMDLs, are there other factors you're looking at or are required to look at?
So right now, we're trying to address the TMDLs. So the two TMDLs we have, one is temperature, the other one is bacteria. Bacteria is very hard to address. TMDLs is a little bit more easier to grasp, temperature is a little bit more easy to grasp. And we've got that targeted approach that we're trying to utilize. But those are the two that we have primarily within Oregon City.
Okay.
Yep.
And do you seek outside funding besides what the city can allocate? Grants, EPA, whatever?
We've not. You're not allowed to use grant dollars to address your TMDL.
You're not allowed to do that?
No. So I'll put it this way. Let's say the state imposed a regulatory requirement on me. It's not right for me to go and then ask the state for money to address said regulatory requirement that they imposed on me. It's kind of, what came first, the cart or the horse. So, yeah. So typically for TMDLs, you're not allowed to use state or federal grant dollars. Third-party grant dollars, maybe. I haven't tried. But typically we don't. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's kind of strange. DEQ, I've watched them fund, first of all, impose to the Environmental Quality Commission regs, and then fund transition to help people meet the regs. I didn't say solve it. I said help them transition towards it.
Yeah, I've never had an instance where I've been able to target any grants that help to address TMDLs.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Maybe the regs have changed since I was really heavy into the environmental world, but when I ran the MPDS program in Hillsborough County, that was verboten. So.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thanks.
Martin, would you please give this to your wife?
Oh, no, I'm good.
No, I want you to give this to your wife. And thank you for coming out here.
The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Thank you very much. I am going to stay, though. So I want to hear about Laura's presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right.
All right, so before I move on, I just wanted to show you one thing on the screen. And that is OC Map, which is an amazing mapping system. And in that, so we use LiDAR data for slopes. We have for years. We were one of the first. And then also on OC Maps, you can take a look at landslides and scarps and historic landslides. Watch out, because there's a fair number of them. You can get a fair amount of deposits. All this stuff is already on our website. If you go to orcity.org, you can kind of dig into some of this if you like. So it's under the topic hazards and flood info. So now, switching, I wanted to chat a little bit about the NRC's role in development review process, but when we talk about development review, I want to start by just doing a high-level once-over of the development review process. We try and swing by most of the committees maybe once a year to do that anyway. So I will try and make this quicker because there's a fair number of slides. So for development review, we have the Oregon City Municipal Code. It sets minimum standards. It doesn't set ideal standards or maximum standards. It sets minimum standards. So you have to be at least X type of design features or X distance away from a stream, or you have to plant this minimum number of plants near a stream, but certainly you could plant more if you wanted. Who creates this code? Everybody. Who adopts the code? Kind of everybody. It goes before Planning Commission and City Commission, but a lot of the regulations have to comply with state, federal, you name the thing. So there's a lot, some's top down and some is bottom up. But it goes through, generally, a process to adopt code takes a year. Sometimes it takes lots of years. It just all depends on the package. When we do development review, we do staff reports, and the purpose of the staff report is to look at each applicable criteria and to see if it is met with the development proposal. All criteria has to be met in order for it to be approved. We can put conditions on things like, whatever the requirement was, if you were almost there but you needed to have a different building material, we would have a condition that says, don't use that building material, use something that's on our list of permitted or something like that. But everything has to be met to be approved. If there's one criteria that's not met or cannot be conditioned to be met, then it's denied. So what does that look like? We write these long staff reports, and when I started, I swear a staff report for like a new building was maybe 25 pages, and now they're easily 150. So it's like we're writing books often. We apparently we really like writing code because we want clear and objective standards, and so we write more and more and more and more code, and our staff reports are kind of long for that. But in some sense, it's really good because we want the public and the development community to be aware of what our standards are. And so here's an example of what these reports look like, which you guys have all seen before, but there's a criteria and then there's a finding, and the finding is just a way of, say, explanation. So explain how you meet the criteria above. Ultimately, the onus is on the developer or the applicant to explain and provide the materials to show that they're compliant with all those criteria. But we don't review all of our development the same way. We review them in different ways. And sometimes it's a little strange to think about because we review things based on how discretionary they are. And that's strange because it's not really like how complex they are or how big the project is. It is, what is the criteria and is there discretion in the criteria? The more discretion there is in the criteria, the more the process. We could have big projects that don't go through a lot of processes. For example, you want to build a brand new shopping center, you can do that without a public hearing. And that's because the criteria says, don't make your building taller than this, use these building materials, and if you do that, you don't need a lot of process. The process comes in when there's that discretion. In most cases, though, the vast majority of cases, there is always a public participation and an opportunity to comment and participate. There are some cases where there's not, and we'll go through them. So here's our little chart. We like to say type 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a little jargony, but the higher the number, the more the process.
Just a quick question. So like the new hotel that's going in down there, what kind of type was that?
That was the 3, because they did a master plan, which requires planning commission. With it, there was some variance type stuff.
That's what I was thinking,
So
yeah.
when you're thinking like variances of, then it's a little bit higher level depending on the variance. There's a couple staff can do. But
Just to make a point, any decision that's made by the planning commission is appealable to the city commission, and we've seen that in the past.
Or staff. Type 2 decisions are appealable, city commission. Type 3, so staff decisions, which is a vast majority of them. So we don't have hearings on a vast majority of our decisions because we have clear and objective standards. Type 1 is, so here's public notice. So anyone can participate. We do a lot of things to make sure that people understand and are aware of development. I'll go through some of those things a little bit later. But when we are accepting public comment, we have a public comment period. So we have a window of time. The window of time for staff level decisions by our code needs to be 2 weeks. We normally say at least 3 weeks because we'll give them a week to put up the sign, and all these components have to be in place during that 2-week period. If you ever want to comment on anything, best comments by far are the criteria, because that's what we're looking at. It is, are all those criteria met? Yes, no. please help us do that analysis. I think the more people that look at things, the better. More eyes are always better than fewer. And everything we're doing, we're trying to do in a really open and transparent and clear way. Nothing is secret. Everything is on the website. And then we'll take those comments that come in during the comment period and we'll put them in our report. And then, if it applies to a code criteria, we'll have a finding about it in the code criteria. So we really appreciate public comment. It seems strange because we want public comment. That is why we got into planning, right? Is to work together as a community for a better thing, right? To create the best code and to implement that in a really clear and transparent way. So we encourage anyone and everyone to participate in all of these findings. And I'll get to NRC in a minute. This road will lead there, I promise. So type 1 is a staff level review. You could think of things like a deck. And the reason why it's a staff level review is because there is no discretion. It is the deck meet the setbacks? The setbacks are prescribed. Yes, no. They're yes, no, just question marks. Does it meet the building height? Exceed, our maximum building height? Yes, no. And so those are what we say over the counter. So there's no public comment in those. Because if you ask 10 people to review this development, the deck, then you would have the same answer all 10 times.
I'm gonna actually stop you a moment. One of the hearings that came up was a person that owned property before we had our setbacks determined, and he actually built a deck into the area of the wetland. And I went to that. There was mitigation that was done. Actually, Paul Edgar was there, and he was pleased with this. The homeowner was very helpful. But so a deck into a wetland area is generally verboten itself?
Anything. So when we start crossing simple stuff with complicated discretionary stuff like overlays, then it just boosts it up the chain to more complicated. Yeah. I think generally, environmental restrictions obviously have changed over time, and we had a lot of development that was built too close to streams and within places that we now protect, and it can be difficult for property owners to understand that, and it can be difficult when you just want to add another couple feet to a deck to understand why you have to go to the Planning Commission for that and go, consult with NRC when you're just building a slightly bigger back deck and, it can be a challenge. But if it's simple, but it has an overlay district, that'll automatically mean that it's more complicated and that don't do it over the counter unless you're out of the overlay district. So that the simple stuff has a quick review time. 10 minutes is maybe a little aspirational, but it's pretty quick. The type 2, so this is what a vast majority of stuff is. It is additions, it is most new buildings, it is land divisions, regardless of the number of lots. And that's where this gets a little confusing because it's based off, again, discretion, because it doesn't matter if you have a 2,000 lot subdivision or a 2-lot partition, the criteria are set, there's limited discretion, and the process is the same. Some of the criteria for land division, again, they talk about lot size. Do you meet that minimum? Yes, no. Lot width and depth, very clear and objective. They have a little bit, you start to see discretion creeping into these type 2. So how do we treat stormwater? What does traffic impact looks like? You do a traffic impact study and you get a couple of engineers to say trips go this way and that way, and here's the analysis. So it is some discretion. That type 2 process is pretty much the same time-wise as every other process. So we start with like a pre-development meeting. We call it pre-application conference, but it's like a pre-research meeting. So you want to do some development. Oregon City, for most development, requires you to come in, trace out what you're going to do, ask all your questions, give us your plans, and you're paying us to research your proposal. And we take your pre-app and we transmit it out to 40 to 60 people and agencies and departments, and we each look at our section of what we're looking at, and then we put them together and then give advice. That takes a while, about 3 weeks from when you submit to when you have the meeting, although this year we've been much closer to 6 weeks because we're so backed up because the meetings are only twice a week and they are scheduled out. Then we have a staff level review, what we talked about. Again, we put everything on our website, we email, we put signs on property, we mail notices to neighbors within 300 feet. Our state law is 100 feet. And then we issue a decision. That decision is appealable to City Commission. We have 120 days to do everything. So that's the same for type 2, 3, 4. 120 days to do everything. This is where you'll start to see us say 120 a lot, which is just a number, but when you start to have to go through multiple commissions and hearings, and sometimes things take multiple hearing dates, that's where we start to get squeezed and on the process, which, yeah, sometimes it can be very challenging. So on the notification, again, we mail it to properties within 300 feet. We post signs on the property. We post a sign for every 600 feet of frontage. So if you're on a corner, you get one per frontage. And then if you have a big frontage, you get multiple signs. We email it to a bunch of people, including always CIC neighborhood associations and NRC. We email you everything, probably more than you want.
Yeah. If it's in natural resource overlay, it is always indicated here? Okay.
You would get a
I mean, that's been my basis of whether I want to look at something or not, is whether there's a box, I believe, that is ticked.
Yeah, this file number, it'll say, this one says subdivision, but the file, hold on, let me use this one, there we go. This says subdivision, but it would say natural resource overlay district review. And then down here, because it's all about criteria, right? You gotta meet the criteria to be approved. We would list the overlay districts. So 1749, and we'd say natural resource overlay district, because we want to give people notice that this is the criteria we're using to review this proposal. And if you want to see this proposal, go to the website. Okay, so type 3, it is more complex. Think of a new school in a neighborhood, a new church in a neighborhood, things like that. So things where they make sense, but you have to have a little context around it. They're a little more context sensitive. Lighting might be an issue because if you're the neighbor to that church or school, that you want to pay more attention to traffic and things like that. So they're discretionary. How do you figure out what the impact of that development is, and how do you mitigate some of that impact of the development? That's why they require Planning Commission review. And so staff writes a recommendation, not a decision. It's just a recommendation, and that recommendation goes to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission is 7 people, and they make a decision. They could change the recommendation, disagree with the recommendation, it's all up to them. It's all back to the staff reports, and so whatever they do decide, we make sure that we have those findings to back it up. Their decision is appealable to the City Commission. And again, they have 120 days from when we deem the application complete to make that decision. So we strive to get them before Planning Commission at like day 60. So then we could, because the day is complete, we're sending out the public notice. So that gives, a month and a half or something for it to go before whomever to provide public comment, to look at the application before the Planning Commission hearing. And sometimes they take multiple Planning Commission hearings too. The public notice, it tells you when the hearing's gonna be. They're always here. Well, they're mainly always here at 7 o'clock, the second and fourth Monday of every month, so we have Planning Commission. And not only do we post it on the website, mail it to people, post signs on the property, and email it to people, we also put it in the paper. And then we, when we send out our Planning Commission agendas, we do that through a whole nother email process. So if you're on NRC, for example, you'll see the same thing twice. You'll see it when we notice it originally when it's deemed complete, and then you'll see it right before, the week before the planning commission hearing.
Is there, I'm just looking over there, is there an indicator here on this notification that it is a type 3 decision?
Yes, it'll say it in this top part of it, and it'll say it's planning commission for type 3, and then on the
Oh,
bottom.
I see it, yes.
Oh, sorry, keep using this thing. On the bottom, there'll be some legal disclaimer that talk about it too. But we want to make sure that we're telling you when the meeting is, so you can come to the meeting. This is not the first hearing. We re-noticed this one. This says no public testimony. But call us. We are here to serve the city and answer any questions. We get them. I mean, it's not uncommon, so please call us. I think we're nice. And then the last one is type 4, jargony again, but we're talking about zone changes. We're talking about bigger stuff. There's also legislative, which is like writing code, which runs very similar to type 4. So type 4 is like a zone change. And when we start to change zoning designations around, it's really discretionary. And some of the criteria include, does it comply with our comprehensive plan? As you know, in our comprehensive plan, we have goals and policies. And some of them can be discretionary. For zone changes, a lot of them talk about more efficient use of land or utilities and infrastructure. So generally for zone change, our comprehensive plan supports ARP zones, but it also talks about neighborhood compatibility and things like that as well. This process, same but more. Planning commission, then city commission. Squeezing that into 120 days can be a challenge. Particularly when you got to write reports and change reports. So you often see the 120-day extended when we get into these situations. But legally required to have a final city decision in 120 days. All right, public notice, same thing as I showed you before. We do all the stuff we normally do, plus we put it in the paper. So what about NRC? So there's, before you, whenever I talk about our roles and things like that, I always like to put in bylaws and code and what our missions and duties are. And so I have a couple screenshots here. In here, it's, this is the duties of Natural Resource Committee. I'm gonna read it real quick. The duties generally of the Natural Resources Committee are to review the quality and condition of the ecological, geological, aesthetic, and other natural resources of Oregon City and adjacent areas, and assist the city in developing and implementing policies and plans to protect, restore, enhance these resources and the environmental quality of the city and adjacent areas. Okay, so that's talking about like making code, because you're talking about policy stuff. Natural Resources Committee, through staff, may recommend actions to the City Commission, Planning Commission, and Parks and Rec Advisory Committee is charged with also assisted city in carrying out the Heritage Tree Program. Other activities are identified in the bylaws. So generally, that's kind of talking about policy stuff. But this is where, if you wanted to look at the policies, you may want to look at the code and making it super clear too. Because later in the code, it says, coordination with City Commission, Planning Commission, the committee should receive and may review and comment on all land use applications that significantly impact natural resources and related projects and policies before coming to City Commission and Planning Commission. And then it says your comments should be included in staff report. Well, we include all comments in the staff report, and we send you all land use applications. This is, to me, saying we need to send you an application if it deals with the natural resource, or that is before the Planning Commission or City Commission. So to me, it's saying we don't even need to send you type 2, but I would love to give you just everything, which is what we do, because we rather over notice than under notice and give people the opportunity to participate, because that is good. So if you were to go back in and change the code, I would beef up the duties part to also talk about reviewing applications, if you want to review applications or not. There's just a slight disconnect between the two. So what do your bylaws say? So the code said, and what the bylaws say. So the bylaws say is that you receive notice and comment on land use applications and city activities that have potential impact on natural resources in the city and its urban growth boundary. Okay, so we send you those applications and you have that to comment on. So before we get into some of the details, what are our environmental overlays? What are we talking about here? We're talking about 3 different overlays, as I see it. First is Natural Resources Overlay District. So we protect all above ground streams and features and buffers from those streams and features. I guess all is probably not appropriate since we know there's at least one in Kenema we're missing. We protect the ones within our overlay district. If it's not within our overlay district, then it's a problem because we can't protect it. And how we protect it is by implementing those vegetated corridors, so the lush native vegetation. So feature, lush native vegetation, which you should stay away from building in, and then development. So if it's not in the purple amoeba, if it's not in the overlay district, we can't regulate that lush native vegetation. We never regulate the feature itself. That would be like DSL or other entities, not us.
I'm going to, before you go to the next slide, I'm going to make a comment and then have a little question on it. It was back in the 90s when Metro, I think, adopted restrictions in terms of distance away from streams. And I think their maximum was 50 feet. The city commission at the time passed a buffer that was different, more restrictive on any streams that were anadromous fish-bearing streams. And I thought it was for 200 feet, but I see there's a 210-foot buffer there. That's fine. The thing I wanted to point out, it applies to undeveloped land. If there's a development already there and they're going to tear down a house and build another one, it doesn't really apply to those. I think it only applies to streams in which development has not occurred before. Is that correct?
No.
It applies to everything, but you get credit for existing impervious surfaces or something like
Okay.
that. So you could, if you had an impervious surface that was created legally, so pre-overlay district, and you had like a building pad, you could put a new building pad, and as long as you don't disturb more, then you would go through an exemption process.
I'm glad for that clarification. I had wondered, and it never came up, but at one time, the county was considering selling its area near Abernathy Creek, where it has a lot of storage and so forth, it got restricted on what it could do because of the last flood that we had. And FEMA money, they decided not to sell it, and FEMA monies came into the city that were directed to the county, and that's where we bought the properties for Abernathy Creek Park. The point is that's almost all impervious surface there because it was used for parking and other things of their public works department. So there's probably not much that could be done to an area like that had, in fact, the county had decided to sell it for development purposes because it was almost all impervious surface.
Yeah, and in that particular case, so our code, you have these vested things like this impervious surface. There really is no incentive to reduce the amount of impervious surfaces that's vested. Except for, in that case, when you're in a floodplain and you maybe need to dig a hole somewhere to balance your cut and fill of new buildings. And then that would have an overall result of getting new or increased impervious surfaces. Yeah, so we have the 10 distance. So actually our distance from features is 15 feet for seasonal streams in most cases, and then 50 feet for most other streams, and then 200 feet for fish-bearing streams. There's nuances there. So that is measured out from the stream. It's not like, so it's 50 feet each direction, each side of the stream bank. And then if there's a hill, then it gets progressively pushed up the hill because if it's more than 25% slope, then it doesn't count. So you could imagine a stream at the bottom of a ravine and then the vegetated corridor would be hanging out at top. And so say it was a 50-foot buffer, that 50-foot buffer, if it starts where the break and slope is, it could be a maximum of 200 feet away from the stream, even though it's not a fish-bearing stream. So we added 10 feet for good measure when we adopted the overlay district, because we thought, we think our mapping is pretty good, but we should add another 10 feet either direction just in case. So it does look funny, the 25 and 210, because it's really 15 to 200 based on the stream type. But that's kind of stuff that I think NRC has really focused on mainly, is the Natural Resource Overlay District. But we also have the Geologic Hazards Overlay District. And I don't know how many times you have had applicants come before you to talk about it. Because looking back at the code and the bylaws, it's saying all natural resources. It's not saying just streams. It's not talking about an overlay district. It's talking about everything. And so I wonder if we could suggest to applicants more in pre-application conferences that they should come see you when they're just in the geologic hazards as opposed to Natural Resources Committee. So Geologic Hazards Overlay District, I think there's a lot of confusion about this one too. So we do regulate slopes less than 25%, but mainly, so we have a couple different categories. One is we regulate slopes equal to or greater than 25%, and properties, land within 50 feet of that. So slope itself, then the buffer, because we want to look at the top and the toe of the slope. And then landslides, again, we use a lot of LiDAR data and a variety of data sources, and then property land within 200 feet of the landslides. So if any of these overlays are on your property at all, then that triggers us to do some type of review. So we do regulate a variety of things. Geologic Hazards Overlay District, just like all our environmental overlay districts, have grown over time. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question here. On Newell Creek Canyon, there are what I think geologists refer to as sags. Or in fact, there's been a historic landslide, but it's dropped the whole area, so the area is actually flat.
Right.
So it doesn't appear to be a landslide, but in fact it was. And there's a lot of these in the Metro Purchase property where they have a lot of what they call sag ponds, where ponds have come into these areas. When you look at landslides, are sags included in that? Because it may not be apparent that that was a slide when in fact it was a historical geological slide where the whole piece dropped, but it's flat. And I'm wondering if those are covered in your ordinance.
I'm inclined to say yes, but I don't know 100%, and I will make sure that we answer that question.
You've got a good example of that actually in the cemetery property below where it's the wooded area and so forth. There's a good example of a sag area there that has the sag ponds.
We can look when we're done with this to see if it's in the overlay district, but we do use a variety of data sources, and I think my confidence in the data sources leads me to the answer is yes, but I'll find out. In 17. So, and geologic hazards, our city engineer, which is in charge of our development services department. So think Public Works.
Some of that's irrelevant because it's either on city property or belongs to Metro, but there are areas where that may not be the case.
Yeah.
In fact, my guess is we move into developments into the Thimble Creek area where we've got some of that industrial development going and so forth. That's probably all under private ownership.
The number of properties, the number of geologic hazards review that we do these days is so high. When I first got here, we did barely any of these. It's not like the overlay district didn't exist. It's just we are seeing a lot of property owners developing in areas within the district, and it's a challenge. It is a real challenge. In most cases, when you're developing, I mean, we were talking about Kenema, like all of Kenema is yellow. I mean, most of it is a landslide, we know, and there's slopes and all that kind of stuff, we know. But we have, the applicant hires a geotech, they do a study, city has a geotech consultant, they also look at the study. So with a lot of these reviews that are kind of discretionary, we try and get four eyes, two people, two experts to corroborate things. Same with traffic studies, right? They hire a traffic engineer, do a study, city has our own, we want to make sure it's right. And so that's important to us. I think it can be a little challenging for the public to comment on some of these because we are looking at very technical things. We're looking at scientific data.
Uncommon scientific data.
But I,
Geotechnical, and yeah, people are very reluctant to get involved in that. For example, some of the things that Paul Egart's talked about tonight and in the past. We're not in a position really to speak for or against dueling geotechnical engineers.
I think the public is a really good avenue in geologic hazards to bring in like things that we didn't know. So Paul has said really good comments of stuff that
Right.
like pay attention to this over here, or you know, here's two scientists looking at scientific stuff, but what about this? Or remember when that thing happened over there? That is all stuff that plays into the context, and that is important. And I think it's always good to have people look at stuff because sometimes you can get too close and miss the big picture too. But yeah, I see how it can be intimidating. And if anyone has any suggestions on how to make that less intimidating, we would love to hear it because we want people to participate and comment because, I mean, we're all working together for a better, safer community. And nobody wants anything to slide down a hill, that's for certain. And then the last overlay district is the flood management overlay district. So it consists of the 100-year floodplain and more, and the and more is the 96 flood inundation. So we map that too. In some cases, the 96 flood and the 100-year flood didn't really match up, so we include both. And in Oregon City, we have a bit of a higher standard. We have lower flood insurance rates. One of the reasons why is because we do balance, cut, and fill, and we do lots of other stuff to be a certified community. So for every cubic foot of building or whatever you put in the floodplain, you've got to make sure that you balance that with removal of the same. So if we think about it like a bathtub, when we throw stuff in like buildings, we don't want that water level to rise. So that.
Is our condition of our floodplain, is it 2 feet higher than Metro's? I understood we've got a higher floodplain.
Yeah, we're 50.7 is our flood elevation. And then when you build a building, you have to be a foot above it. So some people say 51.7, but that's where they're talking about like, you know, like mechanical stuff can be a 51.7, but 50.7, but the 100-year floodplain's at 48 point something.
That's what I thought.
So you're right, we are above. And we want to make sure that we are as
So if you go and look at the various
conservative, right?
places where they mark both the 64 and 96 floods, 64 is about 2 feet higher than the 96 was.
Yes, and we don't go to the 64, it's the 96.
Not at Tony's Smokehouse.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
96 higher than 60.
Well, part of that had to do with an exit culvert that wouldn't allow Abernathy to drain quick enough. But I have a question. In your NROD standards, I didn't see a chapter. I wonder if it's something for the future to address post-NROD, once the things are in place, the protections are in place, how guidelines for maintenance of the vegetative corridor that's been required for establishment. I've watched a number of projects, you know, where all of a sudden the work is done to your standards, and then people start groomscaping it and wipe out the values.
it's a really good question. We do have some language kind of at the end of the chapter. So we do two things. So after we take all this time and effort to get it right, we want to make sure it
Yeah.
stays right. And so we always get an easement or a tract for the overlay district. So the easement will get recorded. So when property change ownership, it's really important that that gets flagged. The other thing is we do a 5-year maintenance thing. So they will actually give us money for the cost of all the plants, and they have to every year for 5 years give us the status of that. And at the end, if they want the money back, which they usually do, we have to go on site and they have to have an 80% survival rate. And so on the front end, a lot of this talks about make sure you're going to do a plan that's going to have the 80% survival rate. Make sure that you water it and or whatever the thing, get it to a place where it can survive for that long. So it's,
Do you-
but
do
at
you-
5 years, you're right, there's an easement, and then we just go into code enforcement if someone cuts something or whatever.
That maintenance established period, do you find people forwarding that money because it's cheaper to not comply?
No,
No. The
if they're
threshold-
spending all that money on all those plants, they're gonna keep them,
Okay.
for the most part. I have not, in my experience, I've never run into a faulty one. I've run into funneling them out later and saying, hey, I don't think you're at 80% here, or you need to, plan a little bit more than they do and to get that money. But most of the time, they're pretty good stewards. I mean, county gives us, yearly emails and, yeah. Okay, so here's how we notify NRC. We notify you of anything that's not an over-the-counter building addition or something like that. We give you all the planning commission agendas. I assume we give you all city commission agendas, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't write that. But if you want them and don't get them, I can add you to that list too. And then we encourage people to talk to you, at least if it's a type 3. But the more I think about it, the more we've probably encouraged NROD stuff, and we don't have type 3 geologic hazard, so we haven't really encouraged geologic hazard work to come see you. Do you want to see it, or do you want us to put on the pre-app, that initial research meeting to come talk to you guys about it? Or I guess that's where I kind of wanted to have a little bit of discussion is what we're doing good? Should we change what we're doing?
Well, I think, people might correct me, but I think rarely, if at all, do we have people coming before us.
Right.
Does anybody remember somebody coming before us?
I
The
remember
Cove.
reviewing some plans.
No, but the actual developer coming in.
I mean, just the Cove stuff's about the only
Yeah,
pops in
Cove.
my
I think
head.
the
Definitely-
coast stuff is
definitely
the only
Cove,
thing we've ever had.
And we probably only get maybe one type 3 NROD a year,
Right.
2.
There's not that many.
Do you want to see more? Do you want us to what do you want?
No, I mean, I guess if it's not an NROD, we saw a lot of things, but one of the things that caught my eye, that was a type 2, and I don't think it indicated it was natural resource area. It was in Kanema. And my guess is it was one of the places that wasn't covered in the,
The cottage homes.
yeah,
That
there
is
were
the one.
there are six units there.
That is the one.
And
That's the one that is
was-
crushing us all.
And the point is, if we didn't get that, then it'd be an issue. The difficulty I saw is the response date that I saw when I got it was before we had a meeting at the Natural Resource Committee. And that's what disturbed me most. I did write a brief comment about it. But I really feel, as an individual, writing something when I'm the chair of the Natural Resource Committee is problematic. I mean, I'd rather have the Natural Resource Committee making the comment, and there wasn't the opportunity. And that's what, I'm not sure what's in the 120-day requirement, but whatever I got, the deadline for public comment was before the Natural Resource Committee, and I got that email, and I think, I don't think I got that email beforehand for any reason. So that's my big concern, is having something pop up and not having the ability for any of us to come forward and talk to the whole committee about it.
Yeah, most type 2 applications are 3.5 weeks-ish. So if the timing is just not right,
Yeah,
it's going to be hard.
yeah. And I think that was the one that really caught my attention.
Yeah. The new Holcomb Park Place Village, I'm going to call it, because I knew it that way. The Handress property, whatever's going on there now, has a lot of slopes and canyons and everything else. I'd love to have us take a look at that, or be involved in that, if that's possible.
There's, I don't want to say too much because it's at the planning commission level, but they're reviewing just an annexation zone change, not a development. That would, there's a condition that they can't do anything till they come up with a master plan. The master plan would include an NROD, which would probably have some type 3 something in it. So it might end up, or it's big enough that it might come back to you, but that's gonna be
Yeah.
along, yeah. We could leave a footer at all of our pre-app notes too for people to come, anyone to come with any environmental questions or whatever to you guys too, since we just put it on environmental ones. So we also, your comments have the same weight. And I'm sorry to say, that sounds very rude of me to say, but like, the question is, do they meet the criteria? If you say it as one neighbor or one person, or as the whole NRC, it's the same weight.
Yeah, well,
And so you guys are always welcome to, even though you're on NRC, you could just comment as an individual too. Because we want to hear your comments. I don't want you to be discouraged because you're not having an NRC meeting. Be empowered to comment on your own.
yeah,
I always was under the impression that we could comment on our own if we saw something.
no, I understand.
thought
so. And I've seen-
That's what I did, but I,
You too, yeah, Dorothy just too, yeah.
Another project we looked at, the college is very nice to have us come before us and talk to us about the details of the Environmental Learning Center redevelopment and ask for a letter, which we gave them. So there's been several, actually.
And yeah, it feels like you guys are very engaged. And also too, when people come before you, before they go to Planning Commission, I know Planning Commission really appreciates your input and insight and having that pre-vetted or, posed questions to the applicant to make whatever amendments need to be done. So there is definitely a lot of appreciation for the value of NRC looking at these things.
so we're kind of at the same level, I presume, a neighborhood association is. When you make a recommendation to a developer to talk to the neighborhood association, the recommendation would also be made, there was a natural resource overlay to come to our meeting.
Except for it's required to go to neighborhood associations. It's not required to go to you in our code unless we change our code. It's just a recommendation.
Can we take a look at that code only for natural resource overlay?
To make a requirement for type 3. Type 3 seemed to go with the duties of like,
Where it's required to go to the neighborhood association, we don't have to hear all of those, but the ones that in fact our flag is within a natural resource overlay.
they're almost all required to go to the neighborhood association.
But I think he's saying,
Oh, but-
want to look to maybe require him to come to us.
I think he's,
Then you'd see every
The
type
question,
2.
I imagine things go to the neighborhood associations that are not necessarily in a natural resource overlay.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to see those.
No.
But you want to see every type 2 natural resource overlay district, not just the type 3s that you're used to seeing.
Yes.
You're gonna get a lot of
Like they calls for
applications,
it.
I guess is
Yeah.
what I'm
I think we
saying in a
should.
really weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we certainly leave the note, but it's more of a recommendation and not a requirement. We could take a look at, let me write that down. Let me take a look at, I'm trying to figure out which code process. We're in the process of changing our code now. This is a bigger code amendment. We might, we're also looking at the equitable housing thing, so maybe as a part of the equitable housing discussion, because that talks about processes too, slipping in this discussion. Is that okay?
Now, just to clarify, type 2s goes to the neighborhood associations as well?
Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah. So that's what, I guess that's what we're asking for, but we're not interested in those, it's within a natural resource overlay.
Yeah, so right now, we just recommend that they come see you for type 3. And what I'm hearing is you want to make it a requirement that type 2 and type 3 come before you.
Yeah. And
As
of
long
course,
as it's
we-
in the NROD.
As long, yes.
In the NROD.
And we have no more weight in the thing than the neighborhood associations do, and that's fine, but I guess we feel that we should have that same level of input.
Yeah,
yes.
and I can do some stats for you too, so you get a sense of how many that
What
is
that
and all
would
that
be,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many we're talking about here?
You,
How much time?
you might have to meet more than once a month, but I don't know.
But we're gonna fill up our goals.
Yeah, well, we might become disciplined and make sure our discussions don't last so long on other things and still try to get through the 2-hour period.
That was
Okay, so I'm
very
gonna leave that
thorough.
note, I'm gonna bundle it in with this equitable housing discussion, which sounds like an odd thing, but we also talk about processes with housing. Equitable housing is a project that we're working on, that Pete is in charge of. And we're trying to figure out how to provide a supply side of additional housing opportunities in the city and what type of housing opportunities we want. And then removal of barriers too. But so because of that, it talks about a lot of processes.
Well, I'm bringing this up. Is everybody in agreement to this?
Yes,
I think it's worth looking
Absolutely.
at, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
absolutely. I
Okay.
just remember the many times Ed Darrow came before us 4 or 5 times to update us on
Oh, yeah.
things. And it was important that he did that because
Yeah.
we had a chance to give input.
Okay.
And,
But
yeah.
just natural resources, not flood or geologic hazards.
Well, your floodplain requirements are pretty strict, right?
Yeah, they pretty much are. It's
I mean,
more mathematical,
Yeah,
certainly. Okay.
that's up to you. All, us all.
Actually, I think a geological would roll over
I
into
think
this
so.
because of just the volatility. If you're removing stuff, you're gonna make it worse. And so I think the geological would be important.
Do you want me to dig up stuff on that too?
Yeah,
And then we can do a
I think-
presentation and
I think
show you
so.
what it looks like? Okay.
But the floodplain itself issue, I think, is pretty cut and dry as far as the code is concerned.
Pretty much. It is very, very clear and objective. And you get engineers to show that you're balancing your cut and fill at multiple times in stages and
Well, I was thinking the geological one kind of, you got the geotechs involved and all that too, so what we're gonna impart it could be good, but it might be over most people's heads too, I don't know. There's something to look at.
And for the for Natural Resources Committee, this is Natural Resource Overlay District, most of the time, they'll have a scientist do a study, and we also have our scientific consultant that we use, but we don't use them all the time because some of them are more clear and objective, so it does make more sense to go through more eyes, more people.
I just go back to the times of before we had our steep slopes overlays and recalling the developers, geotechs coming in and saying, oh, we can do this and so forth. And you had the geologist saying, no, you shouldn't. And then it got appealed to the city commission. And because at that time, there wasn't any code that covered it, the city commission overrode the planning commission, even though their attorney said, yes, you can if you regard it as a public hazard.
Forest Edge,
Yeah, it was awful.
tragic story.
apartments.
It really is.
Little crick
You know,
apartments.
and
When
there
did
were
the-
houses, and there were houses too, apartments and houses. Yeah.
Yeah,
There is partial code to the geologic hazard issue. It's called gravity.
Oh dear.
It's the law.
So I think we're good moving forward. Some of this back stuff, that has us worried, but
So much
it
was
rains a
done
lot.
after that. It's great.
But
That was the reason I ran for city commission the first time.
well, our goal is to always do everything in a very open and transparent way. We put everything on the website. We want to be very clear about what we're doing, how we're doing it, making sure that we're working together as a community to do the right thing.
you explained this very well.
Yes, you did.
Yes, very well.
As I said, I appreciate you
Yep.
on our request coming forward tonight. And
Yeah, no, it's good to, it's good.
And we've seen you at other meetings as well.
You guys can't escape me.
That, I guess, really, that's our last topic prior to communications, am I correct?
You are. For communications, I attached some statistics for 2017 to the bottom of the agenda. I tried to keep it to 15 pages. I would have made it much, much longer. We have 5 planners. They're amazing. They're working very hard for the city. Oh, so actually, let me step back. I'm the community development director, so I support the planning and the building department. So we have each of those. And the statistics include both departments. They're more planner heavy because building is a little more, submit for a permit, get your permit, do your inspections on the permit, and make sure that everything is safe for the public. And so those statistics are in there too. A lot of the interesting statistics talk about the number of applications that we've had. If you can go through the charts and the graphs, they're fun to look at, but when you start comparing them, it's pretty amazing. what you saw on the building side of things. So development takes a while to crank through the system, planning, development services, known as engineering, and then building. So sometimes that can take a while, but on the building side of things, we saw about the same number of building permit applications as the year before, but we saw the valuation of those applications almost double. And that's confusing. But the answer is that this year, the building division started to see what planning and engineering division had saw last year, which was a flow of applications for really complex and big projects. They saw the hospital, you name the new buildings. And even if it's not a new building, we had a ton of remodels this year. I mean, Fred Meyer alone was like more than $1 million, right? I mean, we saw Winco, we have America's Tire, we have, you name all of these new buildings that we hadn't seen in years. And it's time consuming and difficult because everything is in an environmental overlay these days. And our code is super long and complex, and it's complicated. And so that means that we've been really busy. In there, it also talks about some of the great stuff all the committees have been doing, and there's a copy, yeah, right there with the 2017. And then it also talks about the long-range plans that we're working on at our planning department as well. Big picture plans are, we got a lot of money for the city through grants. That has served us well. It also has landed us in a place where we're really busy processing land use applications with these legal deadlines, and we're working on the grants, and we're also in court, which has been a part of our story this year, which has been unfortunate. And so some of those long-term projects that we're working on deal with housing. They deal with concept plans, implementations, Beaver Creek Road concept plan implementation. They deal with McLaughlin to Kenema Trail. So we are trying to do our best, and we're focusing because we have to, since we only have so many people, but they're doing good work for you, and I'm very proud of both crew, the planning and the building department, and the amount of transparency and efficiencies and all that we've brought to the process, and we are happy to be working for Oregon City. And I think these people, if we didn't have this group of people we wouldn't be able to turn out this level of work and this quantity of work. You have staff who is very dedicated to the well-being of the city.
Well, I want to compliment you. I know that's true, and I know you've taken on a lot more than as time has gone by in terms of the Willamette Falls Legacy Project, for example. You've got staff devoted to that. We're paying a lot more attention to trail plans and so forth than before, and I don't know that your staff has increased hardly at all in that period of time. And I'm just surprised you don't have more burnout.
Yes.
Me too. That's why we bring them chocolate. Well, we really appreciate the committees and the citizens, and I mean.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you there were two versions of the Natural Resource Committee. I brought them forward both times, and one time it got axed without commission approval. I mean, it was the mayor and the city manager that axed it. The commission wasn't involved in it. But I think what really distinguishes what the situation was now and what it was then was really communications with staff. Yeah. And I think it was the major thing. Poor Pete Walter would say, "No, this is a good idea." It would go to the planning division and then department, and come back with really no response coming from the leadership at that time. And Pete Walter was in a terrible position with that particular. Yes. But we brought that back. Of course, the planning at that point, it was with Tony Conkle there, and I think, I mean, we have failure communication at one side, and then things become hostile, which is what happened within the Natural Resource Committee. And Tony Conkle had, I think, turned that around. He was here for many of the meetings to see that things were moving along silently. I know you've been at very many of those meetings too. I think our relationship is excellent, and it has made a lot of difference in terms of morale of this group. A few people are on this committee that were there before, and it's, I think, the difference between night and day. I thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Also, I believe we really defined our role with Tony's and your help, and Pete's, I should say, in particular, and spent a lot of time deciding what we really wanted to spend our time on. And where we were trespassing outside of our role, we abandoned that. That helped.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I feel as staff, under Tony's leadership, we have a lot of support for each other and all our committees. And so the ability for us to coordinate, you think about any of our long-term projects, the amount of coordination and departments on each of those is incredible. I mean, the McLaughlin-Kenema Trail alone, that's every project is a multi-departmental project, and we're all leaning into each other and our committees, and I think it's really great to see that coordination. I think overall it makes us much better.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
Yep, and then, so just the last thing, sorry, I keep talking. I wanted to announce that we were awarded another 6th straight year as Tree City USA. And we applied for a Tree City USA grant award, and I found out today that we got it. So we are now the recipient of a Tree City USA grant award, and I don't know the final number, but we were one of 12 cities in the USA to receive that. So
Well, that's great. I just wanted to comment, of course, the Natural Resource Committee was very much behind it, but the previous city manager, that was a major,
big priority.
big thing for that to occur, and under him, it went through much faster.
Very well. What does this new grant do?
we got, it's an award, and you can apply for different categories for the Tree City USA Award, but the categories that we got enough points to receive the award were coordination, and that's because of our work with Friends of Trees. I'm happy to say that we signed a multi-year contract with Friends of Trees, which is the first time we had done that, and we had it listed a bunch of coordinated planting efforts, pruning efforts, education efforts, which we are also very excited about our partnership with that. And then it also included our mapping system. So I know I keep pushing OCMAP. It's amazing. I don't know how we existed without it, but under OCMAP, under Water and Natural Resources, there is a lot of really great resources here. So you can click on, oh, it's zoomed too far out. You can click on trees, and under trees, once it loads, it will show you, it categorizes obviously all of our heritage trees, but it also shows our legacies, park trees, street trees. So each time we have an as-built, GIS identifies the street trees associated with those. They also go through aerial photos, and they log individual park trees and things like that. And you can also take a look at historic canopy and tree coverage over time. And so those two things are why we won the award, is because we have good data and we're doing things with this data. Also, you heard presentations on how the mapping affects heat islands and things like that, and that could help us in future tree plantings to show us where we should plant based off the heat islands. And so it's the combination of the tree mapping and what we're doing programming wise with that tree mapping, and then also our Friends of Trees stuff. So that's why I'm very excited we won the award. Last thing I have to say is what I'm passing along back to Pete are, in my notes, is some type of walking tour in the summer, perhaps including Kenema or anywhere else, or driving tour, some tourish thing, and then also having code enforcement come and talk about their processes and answer questions. And those are the two I have. Okay. That's it.
Okay. With that, well, What happens to those trees on the map when they're cut down?
They take them off.
So we don't
They
have,
update them.
the
Go
one,
to the Lucky Seven
There is some
Oaks. I wanna
data-
see if those 2 oaks are gone.
There is some data
Lucky
on here
Seven Oaks are
too.
now the Lucky 5.
So like you're on the heritage trees, we include, on some of them includes like height and caliper and species, but not all of them. Where am I going?
on three, I was curious about the 3 oaks that went down within the public right-of-way next to Mount Pleasant School. They were growing right out of the street, and of course, it was hazard, so.
Those are new.
They were new.
Yeah, I
so-
don't know if we've remapped that yet. Let's take a look.
Actually, they lost 2. There were 7 and now there's 5.
Anyway, no, you don't have to look it up. I was just curious
just
how
pulled that one
how
out of
fast
my
it comes. How
Yeah.
fast that comes.
They'll go over, our GIS department's wonderful,
And-
but they go over those aerial photos every year.
And when, things like that happen, we had, I guess it was Martin that was here saying they're gonna have
Yeah.
to take down those trees, and
Well, and
they let us know.
Well, then they even followed it up too after the fact
Right.
too, yeah.
Yeah, they did great. Yeah, you don't have to bother with it.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, and just one tree, so.
Lynn, Hood, Kruger.
Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Well,
The other 5 aren't.
I'll go ahead and communications. I did want to report the stream signs are, all the ones that the city was going to put up are put up. One of them occurs on, I can't remember the name of the creek, that was outside of the city's jurisdiction, and Martin Montalvo has talked about to the corresponding person in the county, and they're going to put it up. I'm not sure where that was located, so I haven't checked on them. But there are 11 sites within the city limits. They are all in position. They are 2
Excellent.
signs each, so people see it going both ways.
Very good, very good.
This was something the Natural Resource, Great Oregon City Watershed Council paid for those signs. There is a mistake. I think I know why it happened, but the creek, some people refer to it as High School Creek, but it's the one that goes underground there across from Spicer's.
Yep.
And that is labeled as Abernathy Creek, which it's not, but the Natural Resource Committee is going to make that correction.
Okay.
So it was one of the goals that we had set forward in the Natural Resource and the Great Oregon City Watershed Council determined that one of its grants had education as the component, and we checked and they said, yes, signage is part of education. So the Natural Resource Committee made the signs and Public Works put them up. And so it's a great partnership between
Yeah.
It really was.
an NGO basically and the city. And
Yeah.
so that was really good. And,
Yeah,
and,
very
and,
good.
and this body wanted those streams signed, and that
Right.
happened. So,
Right.
Perfect,
yeah.
great.
Did you say the Natural Resource Committee made the signs?
No, the Great Oregon City
Yeah,
Watershed
that's what I thought.
Council paid for the signs to
I
be
see.
made. They were made for by the county sign group.
Right,
Well,
right.
I mean, signs for the
Yeah.
county. But
Okay.
it was our design.
Yeah, wonderful. Good. Good deal. Very good.
Anybody else for the good of the order? Save one, which would be afterwards. The one you called me about. Don't bring it up here. I gotta use it.
Well, I talked to Laura about it, so I'll
Okay.
talk to you later. 15,000 plants were planted in 32 days up at the Environmental Learning Center, which I'm proud of my young people that did that, plus the 1 or 2 staff that they could help with the project.
You had an older person or two there too.
And you helped too.
Well, that was
So-
early on, but I'm
Yeah.
talking about the other Jerry.
That's right, that's right. And so they were telling me that they would have students do it and so forth. I said, okay, I can expect work study students to do a certain amount, but work study students are not being funded as much anymore, apparently. Anyway, the point was 500 plants per day is what it took to do that, 15,000 plants. So anyway, I'm happy. And then Westland called up and said, we've got 5,000 plants for a new boat ramp. You wouldn't want to do this. Nobody else wants to do this. I said, no problem. So we're doing that now.
Congratulations. I've been, if you haven't been to the ELC site, look at the paths that Jerry's group has put up there and the plantings. I did want to comment on one thing. Yes, the student groups and the students themselves didn't do all the work that they probably should have. But I wanted to comment on the sports teams there, because
Yes,
you had, on one of the days, they had two sports teams there that were doing the work and did a great job.
Yep.
And another occasion, there were two other sports teams that were
Yep.
doing a great job. But it wasn't anywhere near enough days
Right.
to do that.
Right.
And so the volunteers outside the sports teams were not able to do the kind of work that needed to be
The
done.
students
And I want
really-
to compliment
yeah.
you on what
Thank
you've
you.
done. It's really impressive.
thank you, thank you. Well, the students would have helped. It was the middle of winter. It started December 5th and ended,
Yes.
you know, like the third week in January, and wow, so.
Yeah.
I have a new perspective. As old as I am, I can still do a few things.
You probably know this, and I think the rest of the committee does. Jerry Herman, with people that he had when you were a student there, I
Yeah,
believe,
right.
got the ELC going. It was actually not
Right.
really a college project.
No, it was a community project.
It was a community
Yeah.
project that
Yeah.
Jerry headed up at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And
So-
all my children grew up through that.
And what is that, a generation and a half or two
Oh, that's a
ago?
long time ago.
But
I had hair then.
But
I had
the
hair.
college has to be,
Yeah.
complimented,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
when they had their 50th anniversary and there was discussion, what should they do? You know, put up a bell tower, do something like that. They decided to direct their attention to the rest of the restoration
Yep.
of the Environmental Learning Center as their 50th anniversary
Right.
celebration event.
This is real diamond. you know.
Yep, absolutely. And Carlotta Collette was as our Metro Counselor outgoing, was very important with that. And then a couple Metro grants, enhancement grants, help support things that couldn't get done otherwise. So the city's been involved too.
Yeah.
That's a very good thing.
Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none?
Oh, well, let me just go on.
You're usually faster than that.
Well, I know, I almost jumped in front of Jerry, but then I went, oh, he's gonna say something far more important.
No, not at all.
I was at the Berkeley Hills meeting yesterday, it's steering meeting, and it was really nice because I had been gone for about 3 months. And they were so excited to say, oh, we want to hear what's going on with our trees. And I said, well, and I will purport that we're now a tree city, and I'll go back to that next month. But I had to tell them that we're kind of stalling a little bit because we need an arborist and a forester and a few other things, and maybe some grants and more participation. And so, but you know, it was really nice for them to, because they used to grumble when I'd give my pitch. Now they're going, oh, you're back, our tree lady is back. That's a positive thing. And so I like to see that. Also, I work with the Oregon City Parks Foundation, and we had a very successful very first auction that
Yep.
will help match some of our Metro grants. We are still failing by about $5,000 we need to come up with. We're working on that. But that will help match the spraying and reading the ivy off the trees in Waterboard Park for 6.5 acres. And we started our planting at the promenade. And we've been racking up the volunteer hours and emailing them into city parks. So, Yay.
It adds up. I would suggest that any of you that are doing recycling of the Coke cans and so forth,
our Blue Bag projects drop in for parks program, you mean?
yes,
So you can find a whole little video on our website?
yes, and that's what I wanted to suggest was that bring your bottles in. I bring it into the PrAC meeting, but you probably could even bring them in here, and Dee Dee would probably be able to do something.
There's bottles right in that back room that I'll be collecting. I'm surprised they didn't get picked up yesterday. Let me just say one thing about our bottle program. There was a Lutheran church in our town that the first year I met the gentleman, which has only been about a year and a half now that I've been doing this, in his first 8 years, he collected $11,000. And I run into him on Tuesdays. The next year later, I said, hey, how are you doing with your project? And he goes, I'm at now $22,000. How they have done this is they have asked each one of their parishioners to just go out to one block, the people on their block, collect those and bring them in the church or pick it up and throw it away. Now, that spurred me to go and do statistics on what I have collected, because I have the first 6 months that we collected and starting to develop our program. In the first 6 months, we collected just about $485. We are now on the year 2, $4,995. That is a 12,000% increase.
Really good.
Now, if you're looking at programs, this is one we should spend all of our time and money on. However, it's one person doing it. So now we need members and more people to help us with this bottle program. And I'm going to, along with Jerry's help, because he's our helping do the layout, we are going to approach the city and all the buildings around to do seasonal programs where we kick in for park, we put out a boot, and we educate the whole community to grab a blue bag and become a sustaining member of our Oregon City parks by dropping in 1 or 2, 3 bags a year.
Very
It's
good.
easy. So now the whole city got my pinch.
Dee
Thanks,
Dee.
guys.
Thank you.
I appreciate
She's
that,
done
Doug.
she's just
But no,
a,
that's a program that we need to really expand. Even if it doesn't stay within the parks, it should be all over our city.
Right.
All over our county. I can't crack the county nut. So if you have any pull, I've got no's. So, thank you.
Dee Dee and I talked about trying to get the plastic industry that produces these things to get involved too with funding because their image is, important and so forth. And the very first plastic lumber collection program took place with bottles and cans, all plastic materials being dumped. What's the Chicago Bears field? I don't know what that field is. In the middle of it, the people would collect the stuff and bring it in during halftime, and then it would be carted off quickly. And then what came back was plastic lumber to help build whatever in the stadium and so forth. And that was called the Plastic on Parks program. So we're talking, she and I, about trying to approach the Oregon consortium that handles water containers, which are handled particularly in this state well, to see if they will co-sponsor what she's doing, double and triple those funds, or maybe some products coming back, So,
Built some little bridges in one of our park and all kinds of great places.
yeah.
Memorial benches, we can sell a memorial bench to help fund another project.
Anybody else want to report on anything?
I have not been around, so I don't know.
Nope.
And with that, anything else further?
Give me more airtime.
Well, if you want, have you got something else? to say? No, that's fine. With that, anything else for the good of the order?
Good meeting.